Hey dreamers, my name is Yarrow and you're listening to the Daydreaming Wolves podcast. I'm glad you're here. I hope you're looking forward to a beautiful weekend and the new moon in Scorpio on Monday. Woo! And then Samhain is coming up as well. So I am in my element because it is Scorpio season now. And I'm settled back in Scotland and I'm excited to snuggle down. But before I do, I wanted to bring you this beautiful conversation with Jennifer Blue. We talked about natural movement, the initiation of motherhood, really coming to honor our bodies and learning about anatomy, as well as creating trauma-sensitive movement spaces, which can totally be in our own homes. I really love this conversation and I love Jennifer's work and I'm excited to bring it to you. So thank you so much for listening. Just a few announcements from me. I will be closing enrollment for Embodied Magic, the membership, at the end of the month. So that is on Thursday. And that is because I think this is shifting a little bit. I really love the life circles that we're doing together. Next month in November, I'm hosting my first grief circle, and I'm currently training as a death doula. I'll be recording another episode on that, but just to say that I'm excited to bring death awareness and that kind of work into this program, and I don't know exactly what that's going to look like next year. And I also feel that I really want to make people feel welcomed and seen and really included in the community, because it is so much about really getting together for the cause that we have. So unless you, just in case you don't know what I'm talking about, Embodied Magic is a low-cost membership program I'm offering. You can join it by pledging $3, $6, or $9 on my Patreon, and it gives you a monthly self-care packages with journaling prompts and movement practices, recipes, tarot spreads, how-to guides for herbal recipes and playlists. And then we also have 2 life circles where we gather together to reflect and just see what comes up and make some magic together. So that is really great fun, and I'm really glad it's so affordable, but I'm trying to find better ways to kind of welcome people into the community. At the moment, for example, I'm sending new members video messages to welcome them, but I think there could be a better process, and I'm just kind of rethinking this whole thing a little bit. So that is why I'm closing enrollment on Thursday until next year, and then I'll be back with a new and possibly slightly different offering. And I just wanted to let you know about that. Otherwise, I'm really loving the Death Doula training and feel so grateful that I get to do it. And I'm also really loving rooting down in Scotland now, and it seems that getting off social media has really enabled me to bring you new podcast episodes more consistently, and I'm super appreciative for your feedback. So if you like this show, please leave a review. That really makes a huge difference. It motivates me a ton, and it also means that more people can find it. So yeah, thank you so much.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I know I always say that, but honestly, I'm so lucky to get to do this work. I have such beautiful people reaching out to me about having conversations about things that I really love. And today is another day like that. I'm speaking to Jennifer Gleeson Blue, which is really aligned right now. The seasons are changing. I'm thinking a lot about what that means to my body. And Jennifer is doing such beautiful work about embodiment and movement. She has the most hilarious, honest, and funny Instagram account. I learned so much about motherhood, being not a mother myself, from it, I think, in like a really just, in a way that really made me giggle inside, and I love that feeling. So I'm super excited to speak to you, Jennifer. Thank you so much for making time for the show and being open to talking to me. Welcome.
Thank you, Yara. I'm so happy to be here.
Great. Well, why don't we start with talking about what's making you giggle in your life and what kind of work are you doing in the world?
Oh gosh. Well, my children are certainly high on the giggle. I have an just turned 8-year-old and a just turned 1-year-old. So life is very messy and strange and unpredictable in all of its mundane predictableness. So yeah, I would say that definitely brings a lot of the giggle. my husband and I have a lot of shared joy around that. So there's like an appreciation for the craziness of this phase of life. And in terms of my work, I'm an embodiment coach and a natural movement teacher, and I do a lot of that, in the virtual sphere of things. And so I'm hearing feedback. I don't know if that's on my end or what.
That might be my dog. I'm so sorry. She's grumbling.
That's totally what I'm hearing. I was like, crap, is it my microphone? No, that's great to know.
No. And I just tried to get his attention, was like waving at him, was like, mate, I'm recording. Come on now. Leave the squirrel outside be. But he seems to have come down. And we brought Giggle into the podcast, so that's really great. I was listening to you totally. Carry on.
And I was mostly listening to myself until I was like, oh no, my microphone's being all funky. And
it's fine.
A perfect example of like taking something on myself that's not mine. So I'm really interested in how we move about life, and so for me, I'm going to use the words like an embodiment coach and a natural movement teacher, but it really comes down to that. And there is the physically how we move about life. So what's happening in our bodies and how do we relate with the environment around us? But there's the way that life gets expressed through our bodies and calls us to change and calls us into our desires and our creativity. And so how are we moving about life in those ways? And what is that point of intersection? So between the physical body and the other parts of life. To me, that's very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me too. How did you come to do this work? Because I think, there's so many different ways in. I would love to hear a little bit more about that story.
Yeah. Well, I think like many of us, it's a story of trauma and descent. I had a really difficult first birth. My son, it was a 54-hour labor and back labor, which meant he was poorly positioned, and so like there was an excruciating quality to it, and it went on and on and on and on. And I had planned to birth at a birth center, and I ended up in a hospital with a cesarean section. And I came out of that. So that was a traumatic experience of itself. In large part, I mean, it's a physical trauma, of course, but it was so counter to my expectations and desires. And I wanted to understand, well, how does this happen? Like, I did the right things. I had midwives. I believed in natural birth, and so I ended up in many ways going down two paths, which are deeply intertwined now. And one was that I had repressed sexual trauma. And so my body was responding to that. And so, here I'm trying to do this thing with the pelvis opening, right? And like my body is like, oh no, we're not going to do that. And then the companion piece to that is that I discovered how the way we use our bodies every day impacts biological function. So the shoes we wear and the amount we sit and the lack of walking we do, and that there's this very limited range of movements that most modern humans go through, and that isn't just creating discomfort in the back or things like that. It's literally impacting our biology. And so for me, those two paths eventually really wove together, and understanding how they feed each other in the system, and how they relate. How does our physical trauma, our emotional trauma relate with our movement habits and our movement capacity, and vice versa, and how it becomes kind of a feedback loop in a way. Mm-hmm. So that was my big introduction. I would also add that motherhood itself, my child wouldn't sleep, and I realized like he needed to cry. He needed somebody to hold him and listen to his own feelings, and I could not cry. And so it was like, oh, if I don't feel, then you won't feel, and you will have to do this work that I'm unwilling to do. And so I better get willing to do it, because otherwise I'm just passing it on, and I don't want to do that. And that became the call. So the work sort of emerged out of the birth in many ways as a wake up, like, oh, I'm not really alive, and I didn't know that. And then the impulse to really follow through was like, oh, like this doesn't actually stop with me. This continues on if I let it, and I don't want to let it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's huge. Wow. Yeah, I just want to reflect that back to you, Jennifer. That is so beautiful and so relatable, even to me as, not being a parent. I donated eggs a few years ago, and I just had a few, actually a series of like daily internal ultrasounds, and I felt so invaded. So it was not exactly the same experience at all, obviously, but it was a similar kind of bringing up of sexual trauma of like, no, this isn't right. And totally, my body was rejecting that experience, and also the medical intervention of it and the coldness of that kind of environment, I think, was really hard for me. So I'm sorry you had to go through that, and thank you for sharing, and well done for moving through it so beautifully and seeing so much potential and growing from that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm sitting here holding your experience too, and just feeling the universality of that invasion. That seems to be a big part of what most women experience. In some way, the physical body has been invaded, and we could go on about the rest of the parts of self that have been invaded by the culture. And it usually happens very young, but then it gets perpetuated, just like you're saying, in these cold, sterile medical environments where, and so then we return to that state of trauma, and without a lot of attention, we can hang out there a lot.
Yeah, because it's so normalized, and that's really, really making me feel like having these conversations is so important, to really name that is not okay, and that that's something that deserves attention and healing and resources and time and space and real kind of openness to just listening to what's needed. Because there really isn't something like this one thing that we could recommend everyone do. Try this at home right now, you figure it out. So I'm so excited to bring different voices together to really illustrate that it's different for each of us, and we can, share tools and experiences and create spaces to explore, and that's so important. But at the end of the day, the most powerful thing, I think, is really learning to trust our own voice and inner knowing and the wisdom and those things. So, yeah.
Yes.
This is a question I'm usually asking in the beginning, but I kind of skipped that because I got too excited. But I want to come back to it now because it feels nice to give listeners the chance to imagine in their minds where you are right now. So I'm wondering where you are in the world and what nature is like around you.
I'm in the American Southwest, so New Mexico specifically, and here it is high desert, and that may or may not mean things to your listeners. But it's so we're at high elevation, and there are lots of pinyon trees and junipers, but there are also alpine forests, plenty of cactus. So it's a pretty diverse, it's way more diverse in its landscape than I expected before coming here. So I'm a recent transplant from the urban northeast of the US, and it's been a big shift. But the open space and the air, the sky, oh my gosh, the sky, and the lushness of like riparian areas where, you have these like amazing streams and rivers, and suddenly there are these giant cottonwood trees. And so it's an incredible landscape in which to explore and continue this work for myself. Like it's been an important geographical shift for me.
Yeah, that sounds really beautiful. It doesn't mean super much to me, but it was really beautiful to hear some of the characteristics and about the trees and the rivers. And also, I'm a fellow ginger. Isn't it too hot for us? weeks ago.
What was the last thing you said?
I'm a fellow ginger. Isn't it too hot for us?
So you'd think so. Where I live, it's 4 seasons. So we, like lots of snow in the winter. In many ways, I mean, indeed, like my people come from Ireland. Like I am meant for cool, like damp, or at least that's the heritage, right? Like cold and damp. And here it is warmer and drier, very dry. And it's the dryness more than the heat, because in some ways, like it gets hot. It's still hot here, but from where I grew up, it also got very, very hot, but just very humid as well. So yeah, I would say it doesn't feel like the DNA is perhaps suited in some ways to the environment. Like there's a way that I can feel that, like, wow, I should probably be in a cloud somewhere. And yet there's, I've also lived in Los Angeles. There is something really amazing about having a lot of sunlight. And in some ways it kind of balances out that lineage of mine where I might tend toward more brooding. And when I get a lot of sun, it's like, oh, I can kind of hold myself more gently. Yeah, so that's how, as a ginger, I experience the climate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. My next question is, for those that maybe don't know the words natural movement, can you share a bit more and maybe also say something about how it relates to being in your body and embodiment in general to you at this point, and maybe also in earlier points in your life?
Yeah, I will see how these all come together in my mind. And I want to acknowledge, most people don't know what natural movement is. It's like an impossible way to lead with, or embodiment for that matter. It's, people kind of stare at me blankly. Okay. So when I talk about natural movement, and I'm drawing a lot here on the work of Katie Bowman, who's one of my teachers and mentors. And so we're really looking at how has the body moved through most of human history, and in what environments, and I guess I could just stop there. In what environments was our DNA developed, and how is that different than how we're moving now? So our quantity and quality of movement in modern life is significantly diminished compared to what it was when we were, say, hunter-gatherers, and so there's an input, and yet the biology still requires the same movements. It's kind of like, you could think about a parallel with food. It's not like we stopped needing all of the nutrients that that the body needs just because fast food is available. Like the body still needs healthy food, so our biology still needs a lot of movement, and natural movement is looking at that. What are the movements that are natural to the human body? Understanding that we all have various limitations, born or developed through injury or illness later, but that the more of those that we can give ourselves, the more health we are bringing to specific parts of the body. And a piece of that is understanding that health isn't a whole, that we can't always look at it as a whole system, that we may be healthy in some ways, but that the knee joint may be unhealthy, or the tissues in the pectoralis may be not getting blood flow because we never ever extend our arms beyond that, which we do when we're cooking or we're typing, or we could probably stop there, right? And looking at our phones. So natural movement is about that. It's about looking at the gaps, the sticky places in the body that aren't moving, and bringing more movement to them in this broader context of how have humans been moving through the bulk of human history. And there were some corollary questions that I'm not holding at the moment that you had asked.
No, that is okay. I did ask a fully complex, a little bit too long sentence with the questions that was. So I was hoping for a little bit of background on what natural movement is, and that is beautiful. That makes total sense to me. And then I was wondering how that relates to embodiment for you, and maybe also how that understanding and perception and feeling in your body has changed over time as you are exploring what natural movement means for you and how it affects you.
Okay, so let me see if I can hold both of those. I'll go with the first, and if I lose track, you can bring me back.
Yes.
And I don't know what this is in your own world and kind of what you've tracked. My experience is that embodiment work can hold a lot of, it's like there's a big like thinking and sensing aspect. So we kind of reorient our mindset around the body, and then there can be a lot of like sensing into what is here and what's not here and how do we feel. And I have found that magical things happen in those capacities when we restore movement and we bring that in. So in this idea, the sense, I work a lot with women, and really, and just like our conversation about trauma and the medical system and things like that, there is a way that women have been separated from their bodies, usually from the time they are very young. They're separated from them physically through various traumas, but also through the habits that we are told to adopt and through the beliefs that we are told to hold about the value of our body. And when we begin to move and we know what we're moving and we are able to, alignment is a piece of this. So it's kind of like if you can understand the rotation of your femur and how your femur will or will not move in relationship to your hip, you start to come into the body in an entirely different way, and you find places in the body that need love and attention. And we could look at this at just the biological level, right? Like, so, okay, if I can externally rotate the femur and I can walk, I have access to my glutes. So if I have access to my glutes, then I'm creating adequate tension on the pelvic floor. So I'm now having a base of support that didn't exist before. And when we understand the external rotation of the femur while walking accesses the glutes and gives adequate tension on the pelvic floor, we're going to, from this deeper level, we're going to see that suddenly we're in the pelvis. And what does it mean to be in the pelvis? Like, we've actually accessed something that perhaps has been shut off for years and years and years and years. And very often what happens is that there are a lot of feelings there. Maybe we even feel unsafe doing these movements. So what does that mean? And how do we hold the space to be there, to really reclaim this part of the body? But without the movement piece, the reclaiming of the body doesn't happen nearly as completely. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It really, really does. I don't know every of the of the words that you use because English is my first language, but that's totally cool. I like to talk in general because I am very interested, and that does really make sense to me. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I apologize for using anatomical terms. It's not always very useful. So I'm talking here about the leg moving in relationship to the hip. Yeah, and how, yeah.
That's
and
really cool. My experience was just like, it tickled me, and I was like, "Ooh, these are fancy words. I don't know. I'm not super." Because I actually agree. There is something really beautiful in like mapping our body in our minds in a different way. Well, what I mean by that is not theorizing necessarily more. This is, and at the end of the day, to me, just a tool for embodiment. But I feel like understanding how the different systems in my body work together and what they actually look like is really powerful, and it kind of helps me think about them with more kindness and compassion, and it makes it easier to understand certain signals and really kind of listen to them and think about what that might call me to explore or nurture or listen to or whatever. So that totally makes sense to me. Yeah. Thank you. I also want to circle back to natural movement and illustrate that a little bit more. I feel that so strongly. I think my range of motions and the kind of habitual movements or positions that I'm inhabiting really feel limited sometimes, and it does give me so much joy to intentionally expand that. So yesterday, for example, I have a dog, so I walk several times a day, which I absolutely love, and we just moved to a new place, so everything is shiny and new at the moment. I'm so excited. And, so we walked this path along the coast, and we found some wild raspberries and blackberries, and I had to kind of climb a little hill, or like the side of this the side of the cliff a little bit, which sounds scary, but it wasn't. It was totally safe. But anyway, so I was climbing a bit and then like reaching up for the higher up blackberries, and there was so much joy, not just from reaching them, because I'm a very short person, and so that was this big success, but also from like really like, you know, like letting these tiny blackberries burst in my mouth, the pleasure of that, and then also the sensation of like having fully stretched out and having made that connection and having used my body in a different way and breathing the sea air and all these different beautiful sensations coming together was just really, it was just like a moment of really big bliss, and it made me come home and think about my desk a little bit differently. I'm sitting at it, so
yes,
yeah.
Well, and that, I mean, and it's not that we can't romanticize any other time period. You know, it's not like, oh, like the hunter-gatherers really, you know, they had the best of it. It's and it's like you just described this, like you used the word bliss. And what would it be like for you to have more bliss? And if that means being, you know, and it's you and it's me and it's all of us, if that means being out from behind our desks and moving through nature, and that enables us to stay in relationship with the self, that enables life to express itself beautifully through us, that enables us to come alive and feel pleasure and bliss, then don't we want to do more of that? And yet it's hard, right, to not continue to stay just a little bit disembodied, you know, like that's a lot. That's a big experience to give ourselves, and we often pull away from it.
Yeah, totally, I agree. I have another question, which is, and you can really take this any way you like, but I'm wondering, what do you wish everyone knew about the human body?
Oh, yeah, there are ways to take that. I'm just like, what do I wish I really, you know, took in about the human body? What feels most real in this moment in response to that question is the value of the full experience. Like everything that we get to experience happens because we have a body. And whether that's the chronic pain, or that's some amazing psychic empathic ability, or that is the joy of making love to a partner, that it all exists because of this form. And I grew up in a Christian church, and I've always been taken with the idea of the word becoming flesh. And so there's this like magic to me that it is implied in being in a body. And I wish that everyone knew that it is magical and amazing that they are here in a form and get to move about life at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I'm really glad we landed there. And at the same time, I hope we can talk again and take this in many more other directions. My question is, from your point of view, having worked with and through trauma in lots of different ways, how do you feel, or you wish, movement spaces became more trauma sensitive? Does that make sense? I think muddled the grammar up a bit here.
And well, it makes, I mean, so I have an assumption when you say movement spaces, you're talking about like yoga studios, Pilates, gyms.
For example. Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's probably a reason that I move mostly in nature and at home. That those, so I want to name that they're like really important when you're dealing with trauma. That sometimes removing yourself from movement spaces is very helpful. And and I think the reason is because one of the most important pieces, and you started here, was this idea of trust and trusting the body, and it often takes distance, from forces outside. That being said, I think that what I have observed is if a movement teacher of any sort is not embodied him or herself, then the environment can't be very trauma sensitive. So there is a piece that movement teachers need to do deeper work on themselves, and they need to start to be connecting these parts. So I'm realizing I'm going to entirely answer this from the movement teacher perspective, because I think the physical environment itself is so varied for people. Like, some people respond differently. I'm super sensitive to noise and things like that. The other pieces, though, is that there needs to be an explicit communication that you're trustworthy. So like as a movement teacher, it's really important to me to always be saying, hey, you're the expert on your body. You know what you need to do and don't need to do. And I have lots of things to teach, and I'm going to invite you into all kinds of different things. And you may feel uncomfortable, but if you want to stop, that's a part of your own healing, is to be able to say that. But it goes beyond for me just that explicit piece, which I think movement teachers need to do in movement spaces, but to also name what is seen. So that can be like, oh, I see dissociation happening here. I see that you're giving me all of the power and all of the authority, and that's a trauma response. And I'm going to work with you to shift that paradigm. So there's a lot of, in my perspective, there's a lot of onus on the movement teacher, him or herself, to be with what's true for a person, even if that is uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yes, thank you. Yeah, it really does. I have explored many different movement spaces myself, and I've also taught classes in my 20s. I haven't for a while, but I might again. Who knows? And yeah, I hear that a lot, and I think it's very complex. There's so many different elements to it, and I think, what it means for someone, for a space to be safe, will be so different. Some of us need accessible toilets in order to attend the class. Some of us need to know as much as possible about the environment and the teacher before it starts. That's something that's really comforting to me, to have as much information as possible so that I can plan. And and I totally agree. I feel like sometimes distance is really good. And as much as I love meeting people in the flesh, and I think there's so much magic in connecting in real life and being in circle with people and, sharing a physical space in the world, I'm also so incredibly grateful that we now have all these technologies that allow us to bring facilitation and teaching and inspiration into our homes, because for so many of us, that's the most accessible space to start in, right? I love moving in my, I just finished my bedroom, and it's this most cozy space. It's just my bed and my altar and nothing else. There's no storage, no books, nothing. So it's really pretty blank. And I feel it's such a luxury and a blessing to have a space that's really just for rest and play. And moving in there is so much more possible for me. And I've noticed since I've moved here 10 days ago, just really claiming that space more, dancing in there, and it's so much fun. And then from that place of feeling really grounded in that, I might explore what classes are in the community here. But I'm really glad that I have this starting point. I think that works for many people. So I'm excited that you're offering classes online as well. And I think that's really beautiful. So
yeah, it gives us I think, when you're dealing with trauma, it's like you need time to metabolize what's happening, and there's a pressure that can happen when you're in a live group, where you feel like, oh, I have to keep up, or I need to not curl up and cry. And and there can be a way that being at home gives you that exact space that you need. You can still be facilitated in some way, or you can move on your own, and there's more self-permission to stay with yourself.
Yeah, totally agree. And I also want to just really quickly tell a story of something that didn't work for me, because I know, and I hope some people will listen to this and just feel like, oh yeah, that's hard for me too, and that's valid, because it is hard. So I attended a yoga class because I really felt like I really wanted movement. I was craving inspiration for different ways of moving and kind of getting into my body. So I attended this class, and I didn't know it was a male teacher, and this has different layers. It's totally fine. I think had I known, I would have probably chose a different teacher. But then also kind of like having that sensitivity in myself brought stuff up, and I was like, oh, you know, like this could be a totally great person, and why do I make this assumption based on someone's name? This could clearly also be a man's name, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I found myself in this class, and I was in downward dog, and this guy stood behind me and put his hand on my back and kind of pushed me down a bit, which I totally didn't see coming and was so uncomfortable with. And it just took me, like, you know, on some levels, you could say it's not a big deal, and I would love to be the kind of person that just bounces back from that. But the reality for me in that moment was it really upset me because I didn't ask for that adjustment. I felt really comfortable with the way my downward dog already was. And it also meant that in future classes, I noticed that my heart started racing when someone was stepping behind me. Even though on a conscious level, I know nothing really bad can happen to me here. There is this kind of, you know, somatic connection to that's not safe. I don't want this. And then being overstepped here. And so, you know, and I think what really helped me then was to say, okay, I'm going to remove myself from the possibility of experiencing that for now. And even though I feel a bit shy that this is even a big deal to me, I'm just going to honor that this is a big deal for me, and that's good enough. That's all I need to know. And I'm going to give myself time, you know, as much as I need until I want to go to a class again. And in the meantime, I'll do all the downward dogs in my own way, in my own way. You know?
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I agree. It's like the impulse that so many of us have is like, there's something the matter with me. I should be fine. This should be okay. And we totally cut ourselves off from the opportunity to heal that and to reset the nervous system. Because it's like you're saying, like, you're not trying to make your heart race, you know? I find that a lot with my clients in exposed positions, like even like being on hands and knees doing a supported squat. It's like there have been several clients where it's like, put a blanket over your backside, you know, like, or be up against a wall so that there's not space behind you. And I was just doing this yesterday. I was like doing some work on feeling safe, being bigger in the world. And so I immediately had the impulse to like come to the ground and just kind of roll around a bit, but I wanted to see what that would be like standing up, right, where I'm bigger. And I could do it I was against a door, but I couldn't do it facing the door. Like I still needed to face out. I needed the support behind me, and I couldn't have my back exposed. And and it's like, really, it's taken a long time to be able to honor those limitations. Like, here I am in my house by myself, and I'm still going to do it this way because at this moment, this is the place I can stay. I can stay here. Otherwise I have to cut off somehow.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing. That's really beautiful. You mentioned a few things already, and I love the idea of putting a blanket on yourself. I hadn't considered that. So cool. I also have a weighted blanket that I really love, and I want to play with how that feels in movement practice, because usually I just crawl under it when I'm a bit anxious.
Yeah.
But I wonder, that could be interesting. Cool. So
yeah, no, I highly recommend. I do that all the time, like bolsters and pillows and things. Like, it's like, can you decrease the anxiety in the movement so that then the movement becomes available?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's cool. So my next question in that direction was, what might be a great home practice that people can try if they feel curious about what you're saying and they're kind of starting to daydream? What is a good place to start?
The first thing that comes to mind is to tend to your environment. I feel that a big part of our sort of complicity in remaining disembodied is that we set our environments up so that we don't ever have to move. And so when I think about a home practice, I immediately think, use the floor. You know, like, instead of sitting in a chair, come lower. If you can, if your body can do that, then come to the ground and see what it is to work on your computer while you're lying on your belly, or while you're sitting with your legs crossed and your computer is up on the couch, or whatever. But there are so many ways. You cut your vegetables on the ground. That if the body has that capacity currently, then reclaim that capacity to get all the way down and all the way up on a regular basis. And then the other thing, this emerged as we were talking about the blankets and things, is to relax the belly. Mm-hmm. We hold so much tension through the core, and you want to talk about things that both separate us from our power and separate us from our healthy biological function. One of the first things we can do is just soften the belly. Stop sucking in, stop holding just like that kind of chronic bracing that we do. And this may be something to practice just first as an exercise. What does it mean to say, be on hands and knees and let the belly drop into cushions, so that we feel that some feedback and we don't feel like we're softening into a void. But then what's it like to just go around your house without bracing all of the time, without trying to be smaller? So those are the two things that come to my mind for right now.
Yeah, they sound really beautiful. I love the idea of softening my belly into a pillow. That's definitely something I'm going to try. I feel like I've softened quite a bit, but you're right. This is a hard boundary for me. And I love this practice of making up random boundaries for myself and sticking with them just so I experience myself in that power, And sometimes they're very silly, but one of my boundaries at the moment is not to have buttons on my belly, because I just don't like that feeling. It's hard no for me, my friends. I'm not wearing jeans. So, does it really, change my life? I don't know, but it feels good to just kind of reclaim that autonomy, yes, around how I dress. So anyway,
I love that. Do you know the writer Anne Lamott?
No, I don't.
Okay, she's an American writer, but she once gave a commencement speech at I think a university graduation, and one of the things she said was to never wear pants that have an opinion about your size.
Oh God, yes.
I love that. I just right. My clothes should not be giving me that kind of feedback.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. But it also means that I don't have a lot of feedback around my tummy, but there's good feedback as well. And that pillow idea really speaks to me. So that's cool.
Cool.
I have another question for you, and this is so big, so I'm kind of sorry I'm keeping it for last. And I also know we won't really be able to totally go there, but let's make a start, and then hopefully we can one day talk again. But I'm wondering what you have learned from motherhood. just like a small one. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have to check the door. I will come back in 1 second and cut this out. Yeah. Oh yeah. Hello. Hello again. I'm sorry.
Fantastic.
Oh gosh, I will learn to mute the doorbell for next time. I'm just going to cut this out and I'll ask my question again, and then we can have a relatively smooth transition into your answer. So yeah, let me just kind of keep the biggest and best question for last. And I feel sorry asking such a big question kind of at the end of our conversation, and I want to acknowledge that it's not going to be possible to really give it the space it deserves. But I wonder what you've learned about motherhood or from motherhood that you would like to share with us.
Oh, wow. I'm just picturing my children wanting me to say 800 things. Have you learned this yet, Mom? Oh, it could be boiled down. It can be boiled down to probably one primary thing that, in terms of relevance to this conversation, which is that my children have shown me very clearly that my reality becomes their reality. So whatever work I'm willing to do to come into my own body, to come into my own life, to move about life in a way that is aligned for me and brings more life and more love and more health, that all of that becomes the container in which they can explore life. So the smaller that is for me, the smaller it is for them. It's like we talked about earlier in terms of like my son and his need to cry. If I cannot cry, then he cannot cry, because I'm not able to hold the space for him to cry, because those feelings, it's too painful for me. But it's also that he gets the energetic and implicit message that crying is not good. And it is an incredibly frustrating thing as a parent to feel like, like your every move is connected to what's possible for your child. It's like, oh, but that has been one of the hugest things. And I've realized how that then, it's not just our children. It's like the work that you do creates more possibility in the world for other people who, connect with you in some way. And that it's like, if I let my belly relax, then somebody else can let her belly relax. And that changes the world. So that piece around children, though, has made that it's brought it into sharp relief. It is really clear that my work really shapes their ability to move about life, and that they then, if I do my stuff, then they get to go on and do the next level. They don't have to do my work for me. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is music in my ears. One of my friends the other day said, that's chocolate to my ears. And I was like, oh yeah.
I like that,
yeah. That is definitely chocolate to my ears. Thank you. That's beautiful. Well, Jennifer, what are you currently offering? Where can people find you if they're curious about your work and they maybe, first of all, I highly want to recommend your Instagram account, even though I'm not on Instagram anymore, but it's so cool and funny. I really think people should check it out.
Well, thank you. Yes. So, and I assume you put these in the notes, so I don't need to.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm at Jen Gleeson Blue on Instagram, and I'm on Facebook. And my website is jennifergleesonblue.com. And so, yeah, so I'm right now, I'm like wrapping up the launch of a 10-month program. It's a rite of passage called Embodied. And that will, the container for that will be closed by the time your listeners are hearing this. But I have so many, like all kinds of smaller things, like a workshop on the pelvis and a workshop on mothering and things like that. But then I have these amazing larger courses, one called Heart Body Method, that's all about restoring the connection between movement and the heart, and another called Restore Your Wild. So that's for people who really want to come into their bodies in a bigger way and move about life kind of from that wild woman center. And then I have a toolkit called Embodied Essentials. So a lot of the stuff that we've actually been talking about today, like just these small practices that can be taken into your life on the regular to help you stay here and to explore a little bit more about what's happening in the body and how can I move differently that's going to shift some things or invite some new awarenesses. And all of that's available on my website.
And yes, we will totally link to that. So if someone didn't have a chance to write it down, that's totally cool. Jennifer, awesome. Thank you so much for talking to me. I said to you before we started recording that, I immediately had a great feeling about this conversation when we first emailed, but also I would love to have you on the show again. And I'm really excited to bring those who want this in for another conversation, because I always feel there's so much more to say and explore, and this was such a beautiful introduction to you and your work, and I'm really grateful and very excited to share it with everyone.
Thank you so much. It's been a real honor, and I feel so, and likewise, since I first encountered you, I have felt held. It is like the sense of there being somebody in the world who holds space that's really needed, certainly by me, and I know lots of other people, and I really appreciate that way that you show up, that gives me the feeling of being held.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.